Hi Equals, it's Kim, and we're back. It's now like almost mid-August. Where has the summer gone? Anyway, for those of you who've been to my channel before, welcome back. Those of you who are new here, this is Kim Perfect TV, and I cover LGBTQ issues. And today I'm just coming to you with just kind of a quick 3 things that you can do to be able to have conversations with LGBT people without risking offending anyone or not knowing the right words or all of the other things that keep really well-intentioned people from talking about LGBT issues. So yeah, I kind of wore my shirt today, the Be Brave and Kind. As long as we're doing our best, remember last week's vlog, as long as we're doing our best, it's going to be okay. So 3 things today. 3 things straight folks can do to avoid offending anyone when talking about LGBT issues. The first thing is names and pronouns. I'm amazed at how many people don't know what we mean when I say pronouns. But pronouns literally are she, he, they, them, hers, his. People, when they talk about you, whoever you are, will use a pronoun. Generally, it's the pronoun that we think of as being tied to whatever sex you were assigned at birth. That's one way of saying what was the M or the F that was put on your birth certificate. So if the F was put on your birth certificate, then people use she, her, hers, generally for you when they're referring to you and not using your name. And if they put an M on your birth certificate, then people generally use he, him, his when they're referring to you and not using your name. Transgender folks, who some of them identify with the gender that is opposite what they were assigned at birth. So their birth certificate may have said M when they were born, but they identify as F or female. And so when they were younger, people would have said he, him, his for them. And now when they are telling people I am transitioning, I'm transitioning to female, now we should be using she, her, hers. It's not really that complicated. And some people prefer gender neutral pronouns, they, them, theirs. Now before you say, oh, but that's a plural. You're right, it often is plural, but we often use they, them, theirs when we don't know the gender of the person. So for example, if I'm expecting a repair person, I wouldn't say he'll be here at noon or she'll be here at noon. I'll generally say they'll be here at noon because I don't know the gender of the person who is arriving. So we do use they, them, theirs as a pronoun in the singular. So it's okay, right? So the first thing you can do is if somebody says, I prefer to be called whatever, or my name is, so maybe you knew somebody as John before, and they say, look, I'm transgender, I'm transitioning, I prefer to be referred to as Joan, then you use Joan. And if you mess it up, you correct yourself and you move on. It's really pretty easy. The only time you're really going to be offending someone is if you purposely use what would be not John in this case, which would be the dead name. That's just what it's called. If you're purposely using John because you don't want to use Joan, that is offensive. Or and the same thing with the pronouns. So if John is transitioning to Joan and says, I use she, her, her pronouns, or you can ask, you can always say, what pronouns should I use for you? And the person will tell you, which ones might be they, them, might be she, hers, and then you use them. So if you're talking about, Joan is my friend and she is going, however you want to finish that sentence, it's really easy. And if you blow it and you mess it up, because I know I still do, you correct yourself and you move on. And over time, it gets easier and you make the mistake less often. But again, as long as you're trying, as long as you're doing your best, I'll make sure I link that video up there. As long as you're doing your best and you're trying and you don't mean to be offensive, you should be fine. People understand. This is a little confusing. It takes people time. Okay, so that's the number one. Use the name the person tells you they want you to use and the pronoun that they tell you they want you to use. And if they don't tell you, ask, what pronoun should I use for you? Or you could always say, so like for example, give your own pronouns. So my name's Kim and I use she, her pronouns. What's your name and what pronouns do you use? And that's one way to invite the information. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, we've done a lot of talk, and I'll link some videos up here, about sexual orientation being who you love, gender identity being who you are, and gender expression being how you perform who you are. So, but none of those three things predicts the other. Yeah, you heard me. None of those three things predicts the other. So just knowing somebody's sexual orientation doesn't tell you anything about their gender identity. And knowing somebody's gender identity doesn't tell you anything about their sexual orientation. And knowing somebody's gender expression doesn't tell you anything about the other two. Think about it this way. All of these things, all of human diversity is on a continuum. So let's take hair color, for example. All right? So we have extremes, and mine actually may be extreme here, but you might have, white hair on one end and black hair, absolutely black hair on another end. And then you have all the color variations in between. All right? And then you might have skin tone. So, I've got tan skin tone today, but you might have very, very pale skin tone on one end, and you might have very, very dark skin tone on the other, and everybody else is on a continuum in between them somewhere. All right? And let's take shoe size. All right? So you might have somebody with a really, really big foot, and you might have somebody with a really, really tiny foot, and then all the rest of the people are somewhere in between. Right? So we understand these kinds of continuums. All right? And so nothing about your shoe size says anything about your hair color. Nothing about your hair color says anything about your skin tone. All right? All of those things are kind of independent of each other on those continuums. It's the same way with sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. No one thing predicts the other. So, as long as you don't make those kinds of assumptions about somebody, you should be fine. But if you do make assumptions, then you're likely to offend somebody. So if somebody tells you that they're gay, that doesn't mean that they have a gender identity other than, whatever they were assigned at birth. You'd have to ask more questions. The first one is use the name and pronoun the person wants you to use. Second one is don't think that knowing somebody's sexual orientation indicates their gender identity, and so forth. Number three, we need to remember that unlike a lot of other minority groups, LGBT people do not grow up in LGBT culture. We don't grow up learning about what it means to be LGBT, except for some very lucky kids. But generally we don't. Unless we get it to an adult and we actively research or join groups or any of these kinds of things. What this leads to is kind of a little bit of a wishy-washiness around the definition of terms, and people may create new terms because they didn't know one already existed. Anyway, it's because there's no set culture around what various terms mean. So some of us, like myself, who do this kind of education, we do our best. The thing for you to remember is if somebody uses a term, even if you think you know what the term means, here's my best advice. If somebody says to you, well, I'm gender non-binary, even if you think you know what that means, I would always say to that person, okay, great. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you? That way, we aren't making any assumptions, and we're doing our best to find out more information. That way, if that particular person has a definition of gender non-binary that's different than the one you were taught before, you can find out what they mean by it. And that's ultimately what's important, not whether, because you might learn gender non-binary from me and then think that everybody's using that definition. Maybe not. They might be close. It's always best to ask for more clarity so that we aren't making assumptions. And I'll link that video up there for you too. All right, so those are the 3 things that I think are the most important to remember so that you're not offending anyone. Use names and pronouns that the person wants to. Don't make assumptions about if their sexual orientation is one thing that somehow you know about their gender identity or gender expression, or reverse. And if they use a term and you're not quite sure what they mean by it or what it means, period, ask. Say, great, tell me a little bit more about what that means to you. And those are my 3 pieces of advice. Hey, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, hit the red subscribe button, turn the bell red or the little symbol, whatever, tap on the little bell, and you will be updated every time I put up a new video. Thank you, equals. Have a great week.